Welcome to the Nerd Search Show. I'm Nathan.
I'm Jhon.
And I'm Colin.
So we're going to talk about Judas and the Black Messiah today. We're going to give it a review, but also going to talk about some of the issues behind the film, similar to our previous reviews. First, we'll start off with our spoiler-free impressions of the film, and then we're going to delve deep into the specifics of the film. So, Colin, do you want to start off with what you thought of the film?
Sure, definitely. I think that comparatively speaking to our discussion with One Night in Miami, this film is definitely much more intense. There's a lot of kind of heavier issues, I would say, because I think that in this particular one, the action is there. It's just like in your face. And also it kind of deals with the story of how all these type of political machinations are happening, and gives the audience a deep inside look on how it is, whether it's justified or not. But overall, I think definitely very intense, and left me with a very uneasy feeling about how our government works, but also just pure anger as well, just like the way that the movie kind of ended, and also in real life, what happened in real life as well.
Anger is right. That's exactly what I was feeling, that I was left with after watching that movie, during the movie, and just learning about Fred Hampton. I had known about the Black Panther Party previously, but not very many details, and to learn about what the party was about, where they were headed, especially with this movie taking place shortly after the assassinations of Malcolm X and Dr. King, seeing where civil rights was at that time, and how Fred was pretty much set to take over all of the Black Panther Party, and then to see a lot of this happen, especially our very own U.S. government working against him, particularly J. Edgar Hoover. I had known about some of his stuff from previous movies and background and so forth. It was good to see that a lot of those gaps finally filled in, but at the same time, it's terrible to see what exactly got filled in. And so it was very anger-inducing. It certainly pissed me off seeing a lot of what has happened. It definitely prompted me to look a little bit more into what was real versus what got portrayed or depicted in the movie. Mm-hmm. And I came away with pretty much, although they took some poetic license and liberty with some of the things in the movie, they pretty much got it right, especially in the spirit of what really happened. And that was even more disheartening to see that that's really what happened. So that's what I came away with.
I have to echo, I guess, what you guys have said so far. It was a great movie, but just like you guys, it made me angry. I said for our One Night in Miami review that I cried a lot during that, but by the end of this movie, I was just very, very angry, not just because of what happened to Fred Hampton, but just the orchestrated assault on the civil rights movement that was perpetrated by the FBI. It's exhausting, and it's angering, and when you just think about where the country is right now, looking back at that and seeing how movements were disrupted, you can't help but think where we would be if those things did not happen, where this country would be, how much further along we would be if those things didn't happen. So, yeah, it's definitely, it's a good movie, and I think everyone should see it, but you should be ready. You should ready yourself or steel yourself to be upset. But you shouldn't shy away from it because of that, because people need to face uncomfortable things about the country. Otherwise, we can't really move forward. So,
right.
Yeah. So that's our spoiler-free section right now. So we're going to get into spoilers and actually talk about specific things. Actually, show some clips from the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, you should probably go away and come back and see the rest of this video. But for a warning, last warning, spoiler ahead. All right, so what do you guys want to delve into that you found, I guess, most interesting about the movie that would you like to start with? I think, Jhon, you actually had me pull some clips. You want to start?
Yeah, so we can talk about Fred Hampton. So Daniel Kaluuya playing Fred Hampton. Mm-hmm. What was Fred Hampton about? Why was he such a force to be reckoned with? And at the same time, why was he such a threat to the U.S. government, right, at the time? I think he was Fred Hampton definitely fill the void at the time created by the assassinations of, again, Dr. King and Malcolm X, very prominent civil rights leaders at the time. Mm-hmm. And as a result, I think his natural gift of charisma and at the same time public speaking, he knew how to really get the crowd going and very charismatic at the same time. So a natural leader, a very natural leader. People were ready to follow him. And that right there was a huge threat to U.S. government, obviously, and especially if many subscribe to the belief that they were absolutely behind the assassinations of Dr. King and Malcolm X. They certainly were keeping tabs on them, and it caused. There were many reports that Malcolm X was also very paranoid as a result of the following, the tailing that these guys in suits were following him and so forth. So we're seeing that again continue with Fred Hampton, certainly. And I think a lot of behind the scenes files that were finally released showed that absolutely they were keeping tabs on him. They did more than that. They infiltrated and pretty much it appears to be orchestrating his death as well, right? And that's all the stuff that I found behind the scenes. But going back to Fred Hampton, the things that he did with the Black Panther Party, I think the movie really went out of its way to show that not only were they a threat to these folks in the U.S. government, but they did stuff in the community. They try to highlight that, the free breakfast programs for the kids in the neighborhood. Along with, he definitely tried to unify several of the more prominent youth groups that were around. I don't know if they were gangs, but they were definitely prominent groups that were around. The Young Patriots. That's funny. It was a leftist redneck group. It's something that's very. I never thought I would be able to put those two words together, but apparently they existed. Mm-hmm. And along with the Young Lords at the time, it was a Hispanic group at the time, and the movie portrayed it. He created something called the Rainbow Coalition. It's funny. I always associate a Rainbow Coalition with Jesse Jackson, but apparently he had a Rainbow Coalition going. It was again prominently showing that that's what he did. And in addition, was teaching a lot of programs to the children with the free breakfast programs. Clearly, his leaning was very socialist, following the likes of Che Guevara, right? And was teaching that among everyone listening, among his high-ranking folks, to the youths in his program as well. He's also was. I think they were doing a lot of fundraising for trying to open up a neighborhood clinic,
right,
as well. It even portrayed him as he found out, or everyone found out, that he's going back to jail again, that they collected all this money to tell him to take it and run. And he said, no, look how much we can actually do with this money, and therefore we need this clinic. And he chose to do it that way as well. So it definitely went out of its way to show what a force he was to be reckoned with.
Yeah. So I actually have a clip that speaks to a little bit of why, I guess, the FBI saw him as so much of a threat, because he was organizing, as you said, a rainbow coalition of impoverished people across race lines. Let me show a little bit of that.
They strength in numbers. Power anywhere there's people. I pledge allegiance to my black people. I will learn all that I can in order to give my best to my people in the struggle for liberation. So the people can decide if they want to overthrow the government or not. There's over 5,000 crowns in Chicago. Between your manpower and the Panthers' political platform, we can heal this whole city.
We oppressed your people for a long time.
I didn't oppress shit. And my folks grew up poor. They were sharecroppers.
AKA the overseer. What if the overseer had banded with the slaves and cut the masters through? What then, comrades?
So, rednecks and Puerto Ricans in Chicago.
Fred, we shall salt to its slug.
Nice work, Bill.
The Black Panthers, the Young Lords, and the Young Patriots are forming a rainbow coalition.
All right. So, yeah, as you said, he was a great speaker. He was able to connect people who you wouldn't necessarily think were able to be connected. I mean, with now today's politics anyway. This is kind of why I was saying that imagine where we would be if things weren't disrupted in the 60s. in the 70s, where we would be if those coalitions were actually allowed to come to fruition and actually blossom not just in Chicago but across this country, where this country would be. So I was actually listening to a interview with a biographer, a Fred Hampton biographer, just before I started recording, and he mentioned that he actually studied Martin Luther King. The cadence of his speech, even though people think the Black Panther Party and Martin Luther King's politics are completely disparate, by the end of King's life, he came around to more of a socialist or democratic socialist mindset. And the professor who wrote this Fred Hampton book actually mentioned that is probably more likely why he was killed, similar to why Hampton was killed. Because if you remember, the march that he was about to do was like the Poor People's March around the time he was killed. So when he was talking about economic freedom, when he was talking about democratic socialism, was around he was always followed, like I think Jhon was saying earlier today in our review. He was always someone that the FBI was keeping tabs on. Everyone in the civil rights movement almost tabs were being kept on. But he became more and more of a threat when he started talking about economic freedom, similar to what Hampton was doing.
Yeah, I just feel as though, like, definitely going back to the Rainbow Coalition, I totally forgot about that, and Fred Hampton and him trying to bring people together from disparate economic backgrounds is something that I think that in parallels to what's happening today is that you see a lot of the cultural wars that are happening amongst different groups right now, and it's all tied within economic freedom and economic prosperity, but of course people are being distracted by the cultural wars, and I think that is a testament of how powerful the message of economic liberation and freedom is to people. And I would argue also that we are actually in a era where we might get to that point, because as of this recording, the American Rescue Plan has been passed. And so there are direct checks to certain Americans right now. So I think in some ways that some of that idealism of a democratic socialist society is already kind of embedded through the ideas from the previous presidential election, and also through policy that's being enacted right now as we speak. And also, I think that going back to what you said, Jhon, about Jesse Jackson, is that Jesse Jackson did run for president in 1984. So I think that in that aspect, I mean, you definitely can see that progress that's happening even past the time that Fred Hampton was killed. You see all that, but it's, again, like what Nathan said, it's kind of like slow because there's been a lot of these impediments along the way, whether it's cultural wars, whether it's divisiveness, whether it's policies that are less government intervention policies over the last 40 years. So there's a lot of this kind of stuff that's happening that's kind of like preventing us from achieving that progress that Fred Hampton was talking about in the movie.
So in addition to civil rights movements being halted or stunted as a result of losing great leaders, I didn't even look at the democratic socialist angle as well. Imagine where that would be today. You know, you only have a few people in the Democratic Party, or even outside the Democratic Party, that's trying to push it more to the forefront. The progressives, right? You've got Ocasio-Cortez and also Bernie Sanders, especially, but they're hitting a wall every time. And imagine it just had more people on their side. I will admit, I lean heavily to that side, big time, and more so in recent years. And I see the resistance that they're up against. You know, especially moderates within their own party, and especially on the other side, on the right, with the Fox News brigade and conservatives and the Trumpers that are out there. Especially where they like to use the word socialism, and they like to equate that to communism, right? And in fact, that's how they're able to get a lot accomplished, because of drawing up that and drumming up that fear of communism, right? And that's exactly how it sounds like how Hoover was doing it at the time, to try to root out the communists, the socialists who are the same thing as communists and all that, and really setting them up to be perceived threats, and taking care of them as such. And that is an absolute tragedy.
Yeah, and I think also going back to what you say about, like, the economic disparities. It goes throughout all groups and all races. And so I think that now people are very distracted. And to your point about Trump supporters, is that there are Trump supporters that are poor, that are low income, and definitely need the economic stimulus that's been passed. They definitely do need that. And so I would counterpoint that in saying there's definitely support and popularity of policies that are more progressive, let's just say. Not so, like, maybe politically or culturally they may be more conservative, but I think that there's been polls out there that's been saying that the mood of the country is more progressive economically. And it's just that all these type of distractions are just up there to basically just, again, distract them from the real issue. And I think that some people are actually waking up to that and saying, hey, I'm actually struggling right now economically. What can the government help me with? And I think that that's something that throughout this movie they try to promote and try to put out there as a message.
Yeah, I want to be hopeful about what's going to happen over the next couple of years, but I also can't ignore history. I think some of the things that you said or you touched on are true, right? And they were true when Fred Hampton was talking about them as well. So there are large portions of America that are poor and white, and they've been convinced to vote against their interests for the better part of 50 years now, because they were fed this idea of white grievance, and a lot of them buy into this idea of white grievance or this idea of white supremacy, and it's kind of, they're spiting themselves. And I would hope we'd hope that the direness of the pandemic is something that is making some people reflect, because it caused economic hardship even beyond where some people had seen in the past. And hopefully the Biden administration, they say that they're not going to repeat some of the mistakes from the Obama administration, those being saving the country and not actually telling everyone that we saved the country. So they're about to go on a tour around the country to talk about what they've done in passing this massive bill. So hopefully some of these divisions can't be papered over, but some of them can be bridged so that we can have a real substantive conversation about things like the civil rights movement and the sabotage that happened there, like slavery and reparations and things like that. Maybe there is a bridge to a place where we can have real conversations about the racial disparities and the racial animus that has happened in this country, and how feeding into those divisions has made everyone poor in this country weaker. I would hope. The last 5 years haven't given me a lot of hope about certain things, but you have to keep pushing forward, right?
Yeah, and I think I want to kind of add to that point that you make, Nathan, is that even now, I mean, people might think, okay, well, Trump is out of office, so not much of a threat anymore. But at the same time, it also breeds a lot of political neutrality that might happen, because they're like, okay, everything's kind of like back to normal or back to status quo. So there's no such type of motivation for maybe some people or some voters to say, okay, maybe we can kind of back off a little bit and just let them do their jobs. And that's where danger does come in, because that's where backlash comes in. That's where the grievances come in. That's where the culture wars come in, and then people will try to kind of dominate that narrative. And I think tying it back to this movie is that, Bill O'Neill is a very politically neutral character at the beginning. I mean, he was an individual who didn't care about civil rights or anything like that. He was just a guy who was trying to survive, but he was stealing cars, and he got caught. And so he was, and then because of the crime that he committed, he had to be of service to the FBI because of that. And that led to all these type of machinations that happened. So that's where kind of like the danger of someone who's like neutral, who doesn't know what's going on, can lead to catastrophe at many different times. So I think that, that's a very good lesson for all of us to say that we really do need to be aware about what's going on politically, even though you may not be the one, could be through voting, could be through other forms of civic engagement. Try not to be neutral and and also the other big aspect is the disinformation and all the misinformation out there, and knowing what is what. It makes it much more complex and much more harder to kind of be politically aware because of all that's going on, because the weaponization of disinformation is much more sophisticated than it was back in those days.
Yeah, you mentioned Bill O'Neill. That's exactly what I was about to bring up as well. Bill O'Neill is a nice contrast to I wouldn't say nice, but he is a contrast to what Fred Hampton was all about. Mm-hmm. Like you said, Colin, money was his God. Money was his politics, right? Although it seemed like he was leaning towards and listening to what the Black Panther Party was all about. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, money was his God, right? Mm-hmm. That was his idol, and that's what he professed to, worshipped, and therefore finally that's what led his life. In fact, my behind-the-scenes research of it, of just Googling up what the truth was behind it, he still made a lot of money throughout the years, right? So just how convicted was he really over Fred Hampton's death, and the fact that he contributed to it greatly. And even after his death, he continued working with FBI on many other things as well. So Bill O'Neill being that type of person, we see that today in politics and also in the political audience, the followers out there, as you said, those that are neutral, those that like to try to sit on both sides of the fence, those that like to claim that there are both sides of the fence that are guilty and equally. To me, I would like to be hopeful too, Nathan. At the same time, the cynic in me really rears its ugly head to say, as long as we got those types of people around, especially knowing that we have the extremists on the right as well, makes it very difficult to continue to have that light, that hope there, knowing that that's what everyone is up against, especially knowing and seeing what's been happening behind the scenes, what we all know to be true, and at the same time, these folks are still eating up all the BS, right?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And I don't think that I'm a cynical person. I think I try to be hopeful. I mean, I don't have nihilist tendencies, but I do think I'm a realist, though. And just reading the history of this country, and the powerful aren't going to concede their power easily or relinquish power easily.
Yeah.
So there are a couple things that you guys touched on that I wanted to talk about. When you're talking about Bill O'Neill, and Bill O'Neill definitely seemed to be a character driven by money, but he also, if you look back at the movie, and LaKeith Stanfield isn't as young as Bill O'Neill was. Bill O'Neill was like a teenager when he was caught up by the FBI and brought in as an informant. And you can imagine how impressionable that person was. Now, and this is not to excuse Bill O'Neill, because just like Jhon said, he continued to work with the FBI well after the FBI and the Chicago police were responsible for the murder of Fred Hampton. But you have to take into account the fact that he was basically, I mean, not a child, but a young adult when they scooped him up, and they filled his head with all these notions. I think when in the movie, and also in the Eye on the Prize documentary, Bill O'Neill said that his handler, Roy Mitchell, was somewhat of like a mentor to him, because he probably didn't have much of a mentor in his life, right? This is a young kid. So this is the kind of thing that the U.S. government engaged in, scooping up vulnerable people so that they could disrupt social movements. So actually
imagine such a thing happening today. I mean, imagine coming out of the news, FBI takes a 17-year-old and turns him into an informant. Holy crap! Right?
Yeah.
that would be unheard of.
We'd hope.
Yeah, we hope.
Just a few years ago, we didn't think all the things that were happening with the NSA were happening, and we heard more about what was happening with the NSA and the wiretapping. We'd hope. I mean, I do think, to be fair to the FBI, as a weird sentence to say, but to be fair to the FBI of today is not J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, but that history is something that was very real that institution needs to wrestle with, the damage that it did to this country. And speaking of that, I mean, so we talked about the economic things as a motivation, but race was definitely at the heart of this as well. J. Edgar Hoover was a racist, and I actually have a clip of him pressuring Mitchell from the movie.
And your daughter, Samantha, she must be, what, 8 months now, is it?
That's right.
Tell me, what will you do the day she brings home a young Negro male?
She's an infant, sir.
I'm well aware.
Respectfully, Director, why are we talking about my daughter?
You killed in Korea.
Yes.
You killed for survival. You would have done anything to get back home safe to your family. Think of your family now, Agent Mitchell. When you look at Hampton, think of Samantha, because that's what's at stake if we lose this war. Our entire way of life. Rape, pillage, conquer. You follow me?
So yeah, the economic
So
stuff.
Trump is Hoover reincarnated.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and I think we talked about this, or we had conversation about this when the camera isn't on. Hoover was a particularly despicable person, but he had several people in government, in Congress, who thought exactly like him, in the presidency, who thought exactly like him.
Yeah.
So it's not like he was out there rogue, keeping tabs on civil rights leaders. This is what our U.S. government was. Mm-hmm. So Trump is not so much a aberration as he is a continuation of certain things in this country.
Right. And going back to J. Edgar Hoover, I mean, he was, all of his palm prints are on everything that happened in the 60s. I just actually watched The United States versus Billie Holiday on Hulu. So he was in that movie as well, trying to discredit her. So I think that every single type of prominent civil rights leader at that time, black civil rights leader at that time, was, in any case, was J. Edgar Hoover had his fingers all over it. So definitely a very, very notorious figure in American history.
Yeah, and as you said, he had the backing of those in government, but he also had the backing of public. Very publicly, especially the police of Chicago, race-baiting media at the time. And honestly, from everything that I read, it sounds like there were definitely two sides to the media at the time. Ones that wanted to really take the angle of the side of the police. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's also other publications, more left-leaning publications, that really want to present the side of the Black Panther Party, particularly the shootout that occurred. And while we're on that, I think we should. Well, we can get into that as to exactly what happened with that shootout at the end, but there was a lot of controversy surrounding that as well. That really escalated the tensions even more so because of all the facts that were coming out as a result of what happened during that shootout. It just looked fishy from the beginning and fishy at the end, and finally, when everything is revealed, the truth comes out, and everyone it didn't get any better. If anything, there was even more distrust after that, especially with the police. Those are the types of folks, the police and many of the followers out there were definitely siding and eating up all of the charges of depicting the Black Panther Party as a terrorist organization, using either race or the claims of communism and / socialism or whatever it is. It worked. That type of branding, the counter branding, worked for the government and what he was doing, especially Hoover, in putting that message out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so the other thing that we should probably touch on a little bit is inaccurate representation of the Black Panther Party and what it stood for. I think you were talking about the fact that the Panther Party did food programs, which they touched on in the movie. They also set up clinics. The interview that I was listening to earlier today with the professor who wrote about Hampton. One of the things that he mentioned was that in the movie, you see Hampton setting up this rainbow coalition. You know, we're all poor. We should all band together, and that's all well and good to say. But they actually showed these people how to be self-sufficient and create programs for themselves. So the Black Panther Party created clinics for the Black community, but they also showed the Young Patriots how to create clinics for their community, and the Young Lords how to create clinics for their community. So they actually had concrete programs that could actually speak to some of the economic things that they were saying in rhetoric. So they actually put boots on the ground, as it were, to actually show, you know, this is where we could go, and this is what we could do. And that's a stark contrast for how the Black Panther Party was portrayed at the time and how it's still portrayed today. I have friends who are white friends who are well-meaning, and they just have this dichotomy in their head of like the Black Panthers and Malcolm X was militant, and MLK was I have a dream. Whereas the truth is far more nuanced than that. And as I said earlier, King was coming towards a democratic socialist understanding of politics by the time he died. And the Panthers weren't as militant. That wasn't that they were about self-defense, because the cops were, just like today, killing Black people. So they're about self-defense, but they were about Black uplift and developing the community. There's actually a interesting scene where Bill O'Neill tries to get Fred Hampton to blow up stuff that they had in the movie that I actually wanted to show. Let me jump over to that.
Sure.
C4. So we gotta do something big, and we gotta do it now.
You out your mind? You bomb City Hall, they're gonna bomb us.
I'm ready to die for the people, Sheriff. How about you?
Yeah, so they weren't about violence just for violence. They were about self-defense. But that's not the message that most of America got. And there's Black people who, because you know everyone consumes this media, who have a shallow understanding of what the Black Panther Party did in the 70s based upon media accounts of who they were and what they stood for.
Well, yeah, look at the way the movie portrayed the opposite image of what the Black Panther Party was about, right? Again, it showed how they are labeled as a terrorist organization, that they are, you know, especially an organization that has guns, and they're using that to definitely stir up fear. Even Roy Mitchell says to Bill O'Neill, in trying to convince him that what Bill O'Neill as an informant is doing the right thing, he's saying, and this is a true part too, I also read about this, Roy Mitchell was involved with the whole Mississippi burning case. And so he brings that up and saying that he fights for the right things. And at the same time, he says, and that's why the Black Panther Party, they're just like the KKK. They're just like the KKK. That's the same type of BS I hear today when they talk about Black Lives Matter, right?
False equivalency.
False equivalency.
Right.
It's BS, right? And they say, oh, they're just like the KKK. It's like, really? Are they hanging people? Are they destroying cities? Are they in hoods doing this stuff?
Bombing churches? Yeah, I mean,
bombing churches. Come on. So the same crap we saw how many years ago against this 21-year-old man? I mean, just 21 years old, Fred Hampton was, and that he was perceived to be such a threat. And to see that the same tactics are being used today, it's just, it makes you shake your head. Really
I mean, it goes also going back to what you said about guns. I mean, I'm sure that definitely if they saw the Black Panthers carrying, you know, AR-15s or something like that, now they'll be like, oh my gosh, we need to have gun safety or gun control.
Well, but meanwhile, you got
exactly.
Right? So
if they are using it for self-defense, then you have other individuals that are using it for self-defense. They're okay with that. But if the Black Panthers are using it for self-defense, no, we can't have that. We can't have that at all. Same idea with stand your ground. It's just stand your ground is in its root very racist, because because what if a black person stood their ground? So a black person just stood their ground could, if they murder someone, is that justified then? Justifiable murder. So I think that all the laws that are kind of like, with gun safety and with stand your ground, it's all based upon that racial animus, because it's just like, because it's just so deep in our culture, and it's almost like it's a disease now it has embedded all of us throughout its history.
Yeah.
For a while, I've seen memes and quotes that say, if you want true gun control in this country, let all black people buy guns, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad that I heard that, and at the same time, we see that too with the NRA, the way they react, the way they come to the defense of many white people. But when a black man is shot and killed, despite the fact he's carrying a license for that gun, they are silent. Absolutely. Their silence is deafening, right? And we see that. And again, same tactics that we see portrayed in a movie of what really happened back in the 60s. We're seeing a lot of it today still.
Yeah. I didn't hear anything from, as you said, the shooting of Philando Castile happened. He was shot in his car in front of his girlfriend. Her daughter was in the back seat, and he had a right to carry the gun, right? He did all the right things that the gun advocates say that you should do. He let them know that there was a gun. They still shot him dead. And
correct.
You didn't hear anything from the NRA, right? Because that doesn't go into their narrative. It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit into their narrative about who's protecting themselves, because they have a vested interest. Not just the NRA, but people on the right have a vested interest in dehumanizing and demonizing black people. So you can't see them as human in need of self-defense and a right to liberty and life as other human beings are, because that doesn't go into the narrative. So I like I said earlier, I'm not pessimistic, but I'm a realist, just based on, and there's just stacks and stacks of history that people ignore, that inform my realist view of this country.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also for me, it's a very good re-examination for me, because, as a teenager, I grew up with Malcolm X, learning about Malcolm X, learning about Martin Luther King, but I didn't really get into like the complexity of Malcolm X until I got into high school, and then learning it as in college, all the civil rights struggles, and then I think that in terms of the movie platforms, I think because of the emergence of a lot of black creators, has really kind of given light to all these kind of revisits of histories that are kind of like, where the narrative was against black people. So I think that it's almost like a relearning and re-education of many different types of inaccuracies that has happened throughout history. And just one other thing about the inaccuracies of history is that, on Netflix there is the trial of the Chicago 7, which is Judas is very intense, and so for me, I was looking for other types of complementary material, and Trial of Chicago 7 is a little less intense. Definitely courtroom drama, is made by Aaron Sorkin, so it's been nominated for many awards as well. But definitely shows another side of what was happening in Chicago at that time. Remember, at that time, the '68 Democratic Convention happened around that time too. And so there was a lot of kind of these things that were boiling up. And like Jhon said, the assassinations of MLK, Robert Kennedy would happen in 1968. So, there's been a lot of stuff about how, 1968 parallels 2020 in many ways. And if as a student of history, I can definitely see a lot of those parallels.
Nathan, I wanted to take it back to J. Edgar Hoover, that meeting he had with Roy Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking into that, and it turns out when the writers wrote that scene, they had no confirmation that Hoover actually had any kind of conversation like that with Roy Mitchell. However, after the movie premiered, reports came out just in February, last month, that they discovered that Hoover actually was monitoring the raid on Fred Hampton. He even awarded Mitchell with some sort of praise, commendation, medals, and all that type of stuff for that. So they were on the right track, the writers, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's a movie, so they took liberties here and there, and one of the things I think I mentioned that the professor had a problem with was just how much guns are actually in the movie, especially since there's already this perception about the Black Panthers and the fact that they were militant and violent. But I think the Lucas brothers, who are actually comedians, who wrote this script, they did a really great job with the script. Shaka King, I think this is his second film, first big feature that he did a great job directing, and all the actors. I mean, we've been mostly talking about all the social implications of the movie, but I mean, there's also a love story in the middle of this, and the love story is there, I think, for a very important reason, to show you that the full roundness of Fred Hampton as a human being who was killed by the government in a room next to his pregnant girlfriend. I mean, and it was a really sweet love story. Dominique Fishback played Deborah Johnson in the movie, and their scenes are really nice in this movie as well. And the main guys, Danny Kaluuya and LaKeith Stanfield, they knocked it out of the park. That's why, that's why Danny Kaluuya won the Golden Globe, and I'm sure he's going to be up for the Oscar as well when they come out. Actually, we're recording this on Sunday the 14th, and I think Oscar nominations come out Monday. So
tomorrow. Yep.
Yeah, what a nice career Daniel has carved out. I first saw him Black Mirror. We've seen him in Black Panther. Get Out is also a very prominent film of his as well, and he's really choosing some very nice meaty roles here, and Fred Hampton being his latest. And as you mentioned, Dominique Fishback, she did a great job as well. You're right, it was very cute, the interactions that they had together. I especially liked it when he offered her coffee, and that little scene that he had there where she catches him reciting Malcolm X, one of his speeches and so forth. And that, again, very nice moments that were portrayed throughout the movie to show that here he is. He's very human. He had a relationship. He had a baby on the way, and he wanted more babies. And now his life is snuffed out. The tragic end and yet hopeful end was at the end of the whole movie, we saw that he is survived by his girlfriend and his son, who is now grown up, carrying on his father's legacy. Well, that was a very, very nice moment where, through my tears, I'm there grinning, cheesy grin, seeing that, oh wow, they're alive. They're still alive today, doing stuff. And what a great way to end that.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's most of what I had to talk about. Do you guys have anything else that you wanted to touch on about the movie?
I just want to throw in there that final raid, right? What happened there. I know we didn't get to talk about it. For those of you watching, and just to remind everyone that the facts that came out was that 99 shots by the police when they went into that apartment. A single shot was found as a fact that fired back. And that single shot firing back was by Mark Clark, who was guarding the door. And either because he got shot or was startled, the shot went into the ceiling. It hit no one. Absolutely hit no one. And so in the media, from what I saw, especially those that took the side of the police, they try to portray it as, oh, it was a battle, it was a shootout, everyone was shooting at each other and all that. No, it was an absolute massacre when they got into that thing. And so the left-leaning publications really brought that out, which is why there was a ton of controversy at the time. They said, so you guys are claiming that all these shots were fired back, and it turns out the shots that were fired back were made by like drill holes into after the fact by the police trying to prove that these guys were firing back at them. And it turns out ballistics showed they were not bullet holes at all. So many suspicious activities, the embellishments in the police reports, the lies, the flat-out lies. And in the end, it turns out that the facts bore out that the police were the ones covering up so much of their BS. Oh, and the other thing was Fred Hampton being in the room when he was shot and killed. Just like the movie portrayed, it appears that he was drugged in some way, which is why he was not waking up. Well, he was already incapacitated, and yet he still got 2 shots to the head by the police. That's what the autopsy showed. So not only did they come in and have a shootout or massacred everyone, but they go right up to him. What kind of threat was he? Knocked out, drugged, because they clearly found some sort of barbiturate in the system, and he got shot to the head twice. So if that was not an execution, well, what was, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to make sure that I emphasize that, because in addition to what we saw in the movie, my looking out and trying to find out what was real, holy hell, was that very real? And if anything, I found more stuff that made it even more disturbing.
It's it's definitely something you should watch, and beyond the movie, which everyone should see as a starter for understanding this time in American history and understanding your country better, or if you're not an American, understanding America better. It's a very good place to start. But there are also other resources that we'll link to in the description as well, that can expand a little bit more on the life of Fred Hampton. Because I mean, if they were doing a real biopic, they would have started with, I don't know, his early life, the fact that he was a speaker and an activist before he joined the Black Panther Party. But I think that they went with this crime noir sort of angle because they had to get it funded by Hollywood, which is probably why there's more guns in this movie than there probably were at the real Chicago Black Panther headquarters. But you should watch the movie. Not to dissuade you from watching the movie, but you should also, after you watch the movie, continue to delve deeper as well.
Yeah, and speaking to that point, I think that definitely as another supplement to it is to watch Eyes on the Prize 2, the interview with William O'Neill, Bill O'Neill. It's on YouTube. It's readily available on YouTube. And just the fact that shortly thereafter that interview aired, he committed suicide. So, no, like, bring up whatever questions you want about that. But again, it's just part of our history that people don't read about until they get to college, or even not even read about when they're in college. So it's just the importance of how we learn about this history is how we get to inform us, later on. And again, just be more self-aware, but again, not be politically neutral. I think that's the danger that we all kind of fall into that trap of political neutrality. So being aware, being informed, and just knowing what's going on.
Yeah.
And to throw more praise towards the actors, we already talked about Daniel. We already talked about Dominique as well. LaKeith Stanfield did a great job as well.
Yes.
Even though he's playing a younger character, we saw his inventiveness, creativeness, and trying to play Bill O'Neill in the character, in that character, to try to, I guess, survive, make his way, and also be in situations that are really high stress. I mean, just imagine, as you said, Nathan, the guy was 17. The real person was 17, 18 at the time, put in those situations, having to make those decisions. And yes, probably very impressionable. Jesse Plemons continues to play creepy white guys very, very well.
Yes.
I ever since I saw him in Friday Night Lights, he's carved out a very nice career as well. And Martin Sheen, awesome as always. Unrecognizable, but you could definitely hear his voice. Hey, that's the president from West Wing. So you definitely very distinct in there. So everyone did a great job.
Yeah.
And of course, the director and writers, excellent.
Yeah, I didn't know. You said Friday Night Lights. I haven't seen Jesse. I didn't really watch that show, but where I saw him first was in Game Night. He was, again, playing a creepy white guy.
A creepy white guy? Do you remember from Black Mirror, Calypso, USS?
Oh,
no,
yeah.
Callus.
Callus. Yeah. He plays
white guy?
He plays creepy white guy very well. And there's lots of the need for creepy white guy in these sort of things. So I'm sure he'll have
Breaking Bad. He was there too. Creepy white guy.
He'll have a long career. But LaKeith specifically, so like you said, LaKeith did an excellent job here. I mean, it's difficult. The movie is called Judas and the Black Messiah, so I guess LaKeith is the main character of this movie, which again is part of the problem that the professor that I was listening to has with the movie. It's really a Daniel O'Neill movie. So the work that LaKeith does in this film is great. I was listening to an interview he had a couple weeks ago, and he mentioned that he actually had to go into therapy after playing this part. And you can imagine why. Just playing or pretending that you're putting yourself in this situation was stressful for him, and he needed to do therapy afterwards. You can imagine what the real person at 17 was going through.
At Hampton's apartment, right?
Right.
Good. I need you to draw me a blueprint of the place.
I don't understand.
You don't have to understand, Bill. You just have to draw me that blueprint.
Are you gonna kill him?
And again, this is not to excuse Bill O'Neill, because he you know, at a certain point he was an adult, and at a certain point, people need to be held accountable for their behavior. Honestly, the real villain in this movie, even though Bill O'Neill was the Judas, is the U.S. government, is the local government, is the
J.
local
Edgar
government.
Hoover.
One of the things that I have that it didn't play, that I'll probably put in post, is not just J. Edgar Hoover, but the local police as well. The local police blew up the Black Panthers headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
They shot up the headquarters and blew it up. I mean, that they were a real antagonizing force in that city. So yeah, and they're the major villain. I mean, looking back at this, Bill O'Neill really is just a henchman, compared to the real villains of this, the real life villains of this.
Yeah, and in that interview, portrayed in the movie, and also in the real life video towards the end that it showed in the movie as well.
Yep.
He seemed to still be right in there believing that as well, that he was right up until the end of the interview. And according to the movie, I don't know if he had an epiphany or guilt, racked with guilt or something, and it turns out he took his life after that. So, but yeah, just sad all around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we've been talking for almost an hour about this. We of course have lots of opinions about this, and we can probably talk for another hour, but we want to hear from you guys. What do you think about the movie? What did you think about the issues raised in this movie and the history of this country? Comment down below, like and subscribe for more content like this, and we will see you next time. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.